to Adulting Anonymous. My name is Kudzai, your host, and I am so glad you could join us. I know it's been a while. It's been a while, but I am back. And before the year ended, I just thought it would be necessary to have a few more conversations, which I felt in my heart could not wait until 2021. So here I am, and thank you for being patient. Thank you for returning. Thank you for always listening. And yeah, as we all know, 2020 has been a very interesting year. I think there's a common trend I observed, and that is a trend of loss. So if you haven't lost anyone you love, you probably know someone who has. And I just thought that it would be an injustice to continue going on about without discussing certain important things that are relevant in the process of losing someone, the pre, the post, and everything in between. So today I invited a very special friend of mine who is going to basically impart her knowledge with us, and she's going to share. We'll tell you what we're talking about in a bit. But I've got Miss Masego Mangadi. Did I say it properly?
Yes, you said it right.
Yes, we've got Miss Masego, and she's an attorney. And I'll just hand over to her to introduce herself and tell you guys more about herself, and then we'll take it from there. Welcome to Adulting Anonymous, Masego.
Thank you, Kudzai. Thank you, Kudzai. Good afternoon to everybody at home. Some of you are at work. I know you are listening from work. Masego Mangadi. I am an attorney and I work for Mangadi Masego Attorneys. And I'm here to talk to you a bit about the importance of having a will and what goes into the administration of a deceased person's estate. Thanks again, Kudzai, for this invitation.
You are most welcome. You're most welcome. So you basically highlighted two of the things we'll be talking about today, but we're basically talking about the importance of a will, just having your affairs in order. I mean, the one thing that we do learn where as the remaining, people after someone has passed is that we do have an opportunity to put our affairs in order, an opportunity to do better, an opportunity to basically set those who love us up for an easy process, if I should call it, once we've departed. Let's start with the will. We can discuss the will and then we'll talk about everything else after that. I have a few questions that most people usually ask me. So I have a master's in tax, and I have also I've studied about the deceased estate process. I've gone into the tax administration of deceased and etc and the whole will, testament, blah blah blah. I even forgot the module's name. But I think the question most people usually have is, okay, first of all, what is a will?
Okay. Before we answer what is a will, when a person has passed away, they are either testate or they are intestate. You either die testate or you die intestate. If you die testate, you pass away having made a will. If you die intestate, you pass away having not made a will. So coming back to your question of what a will is about, a will is a document, it is a written document that shows the wishes of the deceased. The deceased uses that document to outline what he would like his assets, what he would like his assets to be done with. So, for example, I leave behind children, so I want this child to get my car, I want this child to get my house, so on and so forth. And coming back to a will, having an invalid will is the same as not having made a will.
And what is an invalid will?
Well, maybe let me answer the question by saying what is a valid will. So, number one, a valid will is in writing.
Okay.
Number two, the will is signed on each page by the maker of the will, that is the testator. Number three, the last page of the will is signed by two competent witnesses who are at least 14 years old
Mm-hmm.
and who can testify in court.
Okay.
And most importantly, the witness should not be a beneficiary in that will.
Oh, hectic. Okay.
Yes, and then the will then be executed in the presence of a commissioner of oaths.
Okay.
So the execution of the will means that it must be signed and witnessed in front of a commissioner of oaths. It must be signed and witnessed in front of, say, an attorney.
Okay.
Yes.
That's hectic. So if you write your own will and you keep it on your laptop, that isn't an invalid will.
Case law has been passed where the deceased's will was found on their laptop. And the court had to pronounce whether or not it was valid. So it passed as being valid. But to prevent the schlurp of your loved ones having to go to court to go and prove your will as being valid, it's best you make a valid will from start.
Okay, so that's point number one. If you have not taken anything from this today, is that have a valid will. Okay, so my second question is, I'm a young adult, and to a certain extent, I don't really think I own any assets. I have a car, and let's put a hypothetical situation, like a normal adult who lives in Johannesburg or wherever in the world. You're a young adult, you're just getting your life started. You're renting an apartment. If you're not renting an apartment, you probably bought and you're paying towards a bond. And you have a car, and then you obviously have the things that are inside, which is your clothes, your TV, your couch, etc. So now in my culture, when a person passes away, they basically distribute your belongings. That's clothing as well as your other belongings. And then, so like I would stand here and tell you that I don't feel like there's any need for me to have a will because of that fact, where I feel like I don't own any assets. What would your response to me be?
You are wrong.
Okay.
For the mere fact that you are a living human being, you are an asset. Do you have organs?
I do.
You can actually have what we call a living will. It's all the same. It's on a piece of paper. It is witnessed. You sign it, and it is executed before a commission of oaths. Where you say, for example, should I be on life support? I don't want to be resuscitated. Where you say, for example, I want to be an organ donor. And you said something that, your clothes, your cell phone, and all of that can be accounted for in your will, where you say all your clothing, all your handbags should go to your younger sister or your older sister.
Okay. And then the asset part, how would I write? Because then there's obviously the date that you're paying. Because I basically want to chat to the burden of the date when you die, and how a will can actually help ease that process. Because when you die, who is left to pay your debt? What happens with that? And where does the will come in that sense?
Okay, fine.
Because I think we're all just under the impression that it's meant to be just assets that are in a will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Truly speaking, a will speak mainly to your assets, to your free assets, your assets that are not encumbered by any debt.
Okay.
So, for example, if your house is not paid up, chances are that you can't then bequeath it to your children.
Exactly.
If your car is still owing and there's no life insurance that will pay the balance of your car, you can't exactly bequeath it to a loved one.
Yeah.
So, fine. You pass away, you've got assets and you've got debts. What then happens is that an L&D account needs to be drawn. A liquidation and distribution account needs to be drawn. The L&D is typically drawn by an attorney or even an accountant. And the L&D accounts for, these are all your assets. This is the value of the assets. These are all your debts. These are the value. This is the value of your debts. So then, basically, your assets will then be used to pay your debts.
And then the remainder,
yes,
is what gets distributed.
Exactly.
Okay. You're right. That's a question that most people usually ask me. Okay, so we know what happens. So basically, when you have a valid will, you pass away, they go according to whatever you said in that will, and it's a smooth process. So I guess it's overseen by a lawyer. Do you appoint a lawyer, or can I register? Where can I get, like, where can I register my will?
Okay. Say, for example, a parent passes away.
Mm-hmm.
The parent leaves behind a will.
Mm-hmm.
That will can be retrieved from the offices of their parent's attorney.
Yep.
Or that will can be retrieved from the bank. Some people do a will with the bank.
With the bank, yep.
Or that will can be found somewhere in the house,
Mm-hmm.
say the study room of the deceased. But it is not advisable to keep a will in the house where anybody can find it and read it before you pass away. So yes.
Yeah. So I think that's the major important thing to say. You can go to your nearest bank even just to register your will.
You can go to your nearest bank to have a will done. They'll obviously take the will and keep it till you till the day of your death, and till your loved ones come looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
Same with an attorney. The attorney will then keep it, file it away, and the same process will follow. Your loved ones will go to your attorney, and then they will get a copy of the will there.
Okay, happy. I want to dive into a bit about, we've spoken about what happens when you have a will. That's assuming that your affairs are in order, which I really am advising whoever is listening to do. Get your affairs in order. But what happens if I die and I don't have a will?
If you die and you don't have a will, you die intestate.
Yeah.
So basically, the Interstate Succession Act will then be used to wind up your estate.
Okay.
So once all your debtors have been paid, the remaining balance of the value of your estate will then go to your loved ones, but in this order. So if you were married in community of property, your wife is going to get 50% of the value of the balance of your estate. And then the remaining 50% will be worked out between your wife and your children.
Is it children or is it dependents?
Children.
Okay.
Children. It will be worked out between your wife and your children. In this situation, your wife or your husband stands to benefit more than the children, because in that she gets the spouse's share.
Yeah.
Which is about 250,000 rand.
Okay.
So allow me to paint this picture. You are survived by your spouse and your children. And say the value of your estate once all your debts have been paid, it's 700,000 rand. And you and your spouse were married in communal property. So automatically she gets half of the 700,000 rand, which is 350.
Yep.
So then there's only 350 left. So you have your wife, and for argument's sake, you have 4 children. So we have got 5 people that must share from this 350,000 rand. So 350 divided by 5 comes to 70,000 rand. And the 70,000 rand is less than 250,000 rand. The 250,000 rand is what we call the spouse's share. So then it means that your wife must get her 250,000 rand from the 350. So, excuse me.
Basically, your kids have 100,000.
Yes, your kids have 100,000 rand. So the 100,000 rand will then be divided equally between the 4 kids. That's how it works.
That is hectic. And you speak about getting married, like, just to digress a bit. Would you advise people to get married, out of communal property? What options are available?
Okay, you can get married in communal property. Yep. You can get married out of communal property with accrual. You can get married out of communal property without accrual. You can get married out of communal property with profit and loss.
Okay.
Yes.
And so, based on what you've seen, what would you advise?
I would
I'm
advise
putting you under
that,
the spot here.
Sure. I would advise that you get married out of community of property with approval, because that protects each person's estate.
Yeah.
For example, should you decide to get married and should you decide to go into business, and business is a risky
Yep.
thing, chances are that you may be in so much debt that your estate gets taken by the people that you owe money to. Should that happen, your spouse's estate cannot be touched.
Exactly. It's better than the entire household being kind of like taken away from both of you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's just for people that claim that if you don't get married in community of property, you don't love each other. It's not true. You're just being smart. Anyway, I digress. But let's continue talking about the will. Okay. So there are different like I know we've spoken about the will and how you want your stuff to be distributed, but there are things like funds that you have. You've got your life insurance, and I think you touched a bit on that, on how when a person can have like a life policy, a pension fund, provident fund, etc. Does the distribution of a person's pension fund also get dictated, I guess, by the will, or is there a different way that's carried out?
Okay. Your retirement annuity fund or your provident fund is not part of your estate for purposes of administering a deceased person's estate. That stands on its own. So if you have got a retirement fund with, say, a financial services provider, when you are applying for that, you would list the beneficiaries of that retirement fund. Should you pass away before you go on pension or before you draw the funds. So that on its own would get taken care of separately. So that FSP will then be in touch with your beneficiaries as listed by yourself on those forms.
Okay. Yes. That's simple. It sounds simple. Okay. What do you think, from your perspective, and obviously being on the job, what's the most frustrating thing that you come across with your clients in terms of the whole having your affairs in order?
Quite frankly, I haven't experienced frustration with clients that have been responsible enough to have a will done.
Okay.
But I've experienced frustration where, say, a child of the deceased comes to me and says, we want you to challenge my stepmother's marriage to my father.
Oh, wow.
She is claiming to be a lawful spouse of my father who's now late. That is not true. That is where the frustration sets in. Whereas a will could have easily cleared things up.
Exactly. And now the person's not there to speak for themselves.
And I call it frustration because it becomes personal.
It does.
Because even when you are providing advice, legal advice to your client, you are dealing with somebody whose emotions are highly charged.
Exactly.
You are dealing with somebody that is grieving and somebody who is not in a position to rationalize things properly.
Exactly.
So to prevent unnecessary heartache, I advocate for people to get their affairs in order and have a will in place.
Okay. So you heard that. Get a will. I want to chat a bit about marriage. I mean, we live in a global village, they call it. And there's obviously a lot of couples that get married either in different countries. Let's say a South African and a Malawian get married, and they establish a home here in South Africa. And there's also case B where a Malawian and a Malawian get married in Malawi, but then they decide they want to move to South Africa for greener pastures. what is the process? I know the answer, but I'm gonna ask, just so that we can tell the people who are listening. When you're married, right? I think because there's a marriage certificate that's involved, and the involvement of a marriage certificate plays a huge role in how a person's estate is handled when they pass away. And I think, I guess my question is, what should people be what should people be thinking about when they're like alive, when you get married? For example, I'll tell you this one thing I know. If you are a foreigner and you got married to a foreigner in a foreign, you if you're a non-South African citizen or permanent resident, you cannot you cannot get married in South Africa. So, for example, I'm Zimbabwean and I'm marrying a Zimbabwean, and I'm not a permanent resident, I'm not a citizen. I would have to go back to Zim for me to get my marriage certificate, right? But now I come to South Africa. What most people don't is that they have to register their marriage at Home Affairs, South African Home Affairs. And a few years down the line, you decide that you're going to get your South African residency or your citizenship. I don't think people know that you're also supposed to go back and what do they call it? Re-register. I don't think it's re-registering, but then it's just linking your updated documents, your updated identification to your marriage certificate. So I think my question is around what due processes, or what does the law basically say around such situations where you either have a South African married to a foreigner or foreigner married to a foreigner. I mean, you can go wild with your answer. You can tell us what you know, highlight the most important parts. But I think it's something that most people, especially when they're still in love and stuff like that, they don't really think about.
Okay. So from what I gather from your question, you're essentially saying we have two foreigners, or maybe we've got one foreigner that is in love or involved with a South African.
Yep.
And they've gone on to be domiciled in South Africa.
Yep.
Domiciled, we mean that their last known address is in South Africa, and they are basically living in South Africa. They work here, they have a business here, so on and so forth. Their affairs are in South Africa. For ease of things, when their estate needs to get wound up, their estate would be wound up according to South African law.
Yep.
And they would obviously want their spouse to be recognized as their spouse under South African law.
That's correct. You're literally going step by step. I love it. That's exactly.
So what is important is for Home Affairs to recognize that you are married.
Yep.
So in as much as you go to the Home Affairs Department and you go and update or amend your immigration status in South Africa, whether you become a citizen or a permanent resident, it is important to update or inform Home Affairs of your marital status.
Yeah.
You do that by providing Home Affairs with a marriage certificate of your of the country of your birth.
Yeah.
So if you're a Zimbabwean citizen and you got married in Zimbabwe, you and your spouse need to provide Home Affairs with the marriage certificate of Zimbabwe.
That's right.
Yes. Now, as to how that gets done and what Home Affairs will require from you in detail, I don't know, because it is an administrative process.
Yep.
But the point is, you need to go to Home Affairs and update your status, your marital status, whilst you are still alive,
yes,
and whilst all documentation is in order.
And the risk of not doing that is?
The risk of not doing that
I really want us to get the point across to people.
The risk of not doing that is that the South African government will recognize you as not being married.
Yep.
The South African government will not recognize your surviving spouse as your spouse.
Exactly. And that affects everything.
That affects how your estate gets wound up. So if you die without a will, your surviving spouse, the lady or the husband that you've been living with as your husband or as your wife, will not be recognized by the master of the High Court as your spouse.
Exactly. So they don't get any payout. Well, not that they don't get any, but it's that much harder for them to benefit from in terms of the policies that you had in place,
Exactly.
your assets that you had, then everything just becomes
Everything
harder.
becomes a challenge, and your surviving spouse may need to spend an arm and a leg in instructing an attorney to have that marriage declared valid. In South Africa.
In South Africa, because like now you're dead, you're not there to speak to yourself for yourself and say anyone can claim that they were married to you once you're dead.
Sadly, that does happen. That does happen.
People come and say, "I was married to this with more than one person."
Well, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm spewing salacious gossip here, but we do have instances where a husband has moved on to a city. They've left a wife back home in the village, and when they are here in the city, they get married or they get involved with somebody over a long period of time to the extent of where you can deem the person their spouse. And so, on the passing of that person, we have a situation where the spouse from the village and the spouse from the city are at loggerheads.
You guys, get your affairs in order. Get your affairs in order. Yeah, so I think that's basically the major things I wanted to highlight to people. I think it's important to just educate people about these processes and to hear it from the horse's mouth. I mean, you deal with these issues on a daily basis. We just hear, get a will, and we know better, but we don't do better.
And I must say that every year, during the month of September, a number of law firms around the country offer their services for free. You are able to walk into an attorney's office and have your will done for free.
For free. Can you imagine? And we still don't have wills. What's your excuse? What's my excuse? Anyway, I have a will. No, I have a will. Do you have a will?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
Okay. My next question was, what's in the will? But don't answer that.
To kill me before it's my time to go.
Yeah, people. I think that's the major thing with people. Like, and they hide like their wills because they're like, if you knew how much I have, what I have, you're gonna kill me. Because so I think it's just a weird process. But I think one thing I've learned this year is that we need to be comfortable with the process of death. We need to be comfortable with the certainty of death in relation to each and every person you love, even if you don't know a person. Like, one way or the other, the person's time is coming and your time is coming. And I think if you know that for a fact, why not put your affairs in order? There's no point in walking around trying to avoid it or trying to act like you won't. And the unfortunate part is there's no scheduled date or time that you know of that this could be the last day you're here. So for the benefit of yourself, the people you love, and just get a will.
And I must also say that in your will, like I say, you can have specific instructions of I don't want to be kept on life support for an unnecessary long time, or you want to be kept on life support. You can also say, for example, where you would like to be buried. One prominent lady that we know of, Mama Madikizela Mandela, in her will, she was very clear that she wants to be buried at Fourways Memorial Park, right next to her grandchildren. So Kudzai, as you can see, it is not always about money. A will, like I say, simply communicates the wishes, the last wishes of the deceased.
That is perfect. And any parting words, anything else you'd like to educate us on before we say goodbye to our listeners? Anything that's still in your heart that you feel like we need to know, and that,
I can't stress the importance of having a valid will done. So you are not obliged to go and have a will done with an attorney. Like we say, you can go to a bank, you can have a will done with your accountant, you can have a will done with your financial advisor, but have a will that is valid to avoid unnecessary conflict upon your passing.
That is literally what this is all about, everyone. And thank you for listening. It's definitely not a conversation we're used to on the podcast. It's definitely not light-hearted, but it's necessary. And I hope if you listened to this, I hope you learned a thing or two, and I hope it really pushes you to put your affairs in order. We should probably call this "Fix Your Affairs," like you said. Fix your
Fix your
affairs.
face.
Fix your affairs. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Miss Mangadi, for blessing us and for teaching us. I learned a lot. And yeah, thank you. Any parting words? And yeah.
Thank you so much, Kudzai. I really, really, really like the idea of Adulting Anonymous. We should have more conversations like these in the future.
Yeah.
Not necessarily law related, but things that my generation, young adults, your generation, should be thinking about and doing.
Exactly.
To best equip themselves for this life that we are living.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And that's the purpose of this podcast. If you didn't know, I'm joking. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Till next time.
Cheerio.